The past is a curious thing. It's with you all the time. I suppose an hour never passes without your thinking of things that happened 10 or 20 years ago. And yet most of the time, it's got no reality. It's just a set of facts you've learned, like a lot of stuff in a history book. Then, some chance sight or sound or smell, especially smell, sets you going. And the past doesn't merely come back to you. You're actually in the past. I suppose Lower Binfield was just like any other market town of about 2,000 inhabitants. It was in Oxfordshire. I keep saying was, you notice, though after all the place still exists, about 5 miles from the Thames. It lay in a bit of a valley with a low ripple of hills between itself and the Thames, and higher hills behind. On top of the hills there were woods in sort of dim blue masses, among which you could see a great white house with a colonnade. When you're very small, you don't look into the distance.
In this house, Roselawn in Oxfordshire, Eric Blair was brought up in the early 1900s. This series of arena films tells the story of Blair's extraordinary life and of his transformation into George Orwell, one of the most remarkable figures of 20th century literature. For Orwell was not one of those writers whose life disappeared into his work. His history is the history of the troubled times through which he lived. His story is told in his own words and in the words of those who knew him, if anyone ever did know this remote, contradictory figure who guarded his privacy so closely that he requested in his will that no biography of him should ever be written.
It was Orwell's request in his will that no biography should be written. Do you think he made that request because he had something to hide?
I thought that at first, as anybody would, that there might be a skeleton in the cupboard, but there weren't no skeletons in the cupboard. No, I think it's only a judgment, and there's no evidence why he said it, but just that he was really such a scrupulous writer that he didn't want any distractions from his writings. He wanted people to read his writings, and he probably modestly thought that he'd led a very ordinary life, i.e. he'd been to Eton, he'd been in the Burma police, he'd been living among tramps, he'd fought in Spain, he'd been in the Home Guard, he'd worked for the BBC, nearly got drowned in whirlpools in Scotland. I mean, he really did view his life as extremely ordinary. I mean, confusing ordinary with simple.
From a very early age, perhaps the age of 5 or 6, I knew that when I grew up I should be a writer. Between the ages of about 17 and 24, I tried to abandon this idea, but I did so with the consciousness that I was outraging my true nature, and that sooner or later I would have to settle down and write books. I was the middle child of 3, but there was a gap of 5 years on either side, and I barely saw my father before I was 8. For this, and other reasons, I was somewhat lonely, and I soon developed disagreeable mannerisms, which made me unpopular throughout my school days. I had the lonely child's habit of making up stories and holding conversations with imaginary persons, and I think from the very start my literary ambitions were mixed up with a feeling of being isolated and undervalued.
The principal thing started in his place in the home. He was lonely. If he'd had a brother, he'd have been much happier. And then there wasn't a great deal of harmony in his family, between his parents, and he grieved over that.
Does the interest in the small boy you remember nearly 70 years ago surprise you? Did he seem to you in any way remarkable?
What, Blair? No, rather the reverse. Dull, uninteresting, unattractive. That won't do for everyone is his fan now, but of course I only knew him as a kid. He probably became brilliant after Eton. And did he go to Oxford? No. A bell rang, and we all leapt out of bed, put on a dressing gown and slippers, rushed down to the swimming bath, which was in the gymnasium, dived in, swam the length. If we couldn't swim, we just walked down the steps and submerged ourselves and up again into this cold bath, then upstairs again, got dressed, downstairs again, and paraded on the roller skating rink for Mr. Wilkes to turn up and take the PT class.
Who ran the school? Was it a private concern?
It was really run by Mrs. Wilkes, the wife of the headmaster.
Mrs. Wilkes was nicknamed Flip, and I shall call her by that name, for I seldom think of her by any other. She was a stocky, square-built woman, hard red cheeks, a flat top to her head, prominent brows and deep-set, suspicious eyes. Although a great deal of the time she was full of false-heartedness, buck up, old chap, and so forth, her eyes never lost their anxious, accusing look.
She could be charming. She was very energetic, and she could be most interesting. But if you showed signs of not having done the preparation that you were told to do the night before, for instance, learn a verse of the Bible which you could recite by heart after breakfast, and if you were called on to recite it and you couldn't do it, she got into a fury. And that's why Blair, who had a plain circular moon face and fair greasy hair, used to put extra grease on his hair so that when she pulled it, as a punishment for his not having done his prep, her hands slipped off.
This was a great abiding lesson of my boyhood. I was in a world where it was not possible for me to be good. In the study was the headmaster, nicknamed Sambo. As I sat snivelling on the edge of a chair in Sambo's study, I had a conviction of sin and folly and weakness such as I do not remember to have felt before.
So what was this little boy, Eric Blair, like? What impression did he make on you when you first saw him here?
Well, this is how I described him, writing about it a few years afterwards. Tall, pale, with his flaccid cheeks, large spatulate fingers and supercilious voice, he was one of those boys who seem born old. We often walked together over the downs in our green jerseys and corduroy breeches discussing literature. And we both won in consecutive years the inevitable Harrow History Prize. I was a stage rebel, Orwell a true one.
Was he liked, or was he reasonably popular?
Well, yes, you know, there was always something about him that people couldn't help liking him. However much he shocked them and disapproved of them and antagonized them, in nearly all cases, something shone through about him which made you want him to like you a little bit better. And you never lost your temper with him, although he was absolutely maddening. And
So what did you talk to George about on these walks on the downs?
well, I think a lot of the time we talked about the books we've been reading. And then there was our secret reading, which we enjoyed very much. We could talk about to each other. Of course, he liked these very morbid stories about mysterious plagues and illnesses. He liked the Mask of the Red Death, and he liked Orwell's imaginative stories about people from other worlds causing epidemics and pestilences. And he liked these fearful morbid moral questions like, would you drink a pint of blood to save your father?
He gave me that crucifix when he gave me Dracula. It's got the Virgin and Child on one side and the Christ on the crucifix on the other. And he gave me that, and he also gave me a clove of garlic. The clove of garlic has departed many years ago, but anyway, that's what he gave me in order to protect me from Dracula.
So I don't think either you or Orwell was particularly great at cricket, were you?
No, we were the stuff of second 11s in comparative schools. But we did spend a terrible lot of time in nets like these, and I remember the very, very alarming feelings of being hemmed in while one batted and various bowlers bowled at one, including the school fast bowler, and the masters looked on to see if one was promising material, and one knew one would be found out if one was flinching.
By the social standards that prevailed about me, I was no good, and could not be any good. But all the different kinds of virtue seemed to be mysteriously interconnected and to belong to much the same people. It was not only money that mattered, there was also strength, beauty, charm, athleticism, and something called guts, or character, which in reality meant the power to impose your will on others. I did not possess any of these qualities. At games, for instance, I was hopeless. I was damned. I had no money, I was weak, I was ugly, I was unpopular, I had a chronic cough, I was cowardly, I smelt. This picture, I should add, was not altogether fanciful. I was an unattractive boy. A child's belief in its own shortcomings is not much influenced by fact. Until after I'd left school for good, I continued to believe that I was preternaturally ugly. It was what my schoolfellows had told me. I had no other authority to refer to. I left St Cyprian's forever. It was the end of a winter term. With a sense of coming out from darkness into sunlight, I put on my old boy's tie as we dressed for the journey. I'd won a scholarship to Eton. At Eton you had a room to yourself, a room which might even have a fire in it. What did you like about him? What drew you to him?
He was very good company. He was rather mature for a boy of that age. He wasn't, what shall I say, wasn't light-hearted company. His humour was always rather satirical. But it was, boys loved that. And one found it rather grown up and very splendid. And he was also very well read, even at that age. He certainly had an interest in words, in language, in the English. You know, I remember, for instance, we had, curiously enough, as our French master for a brief period, Aldous Huxley. And very incompetent he was, but we rather loved it because of his talk, the words he used. And we would try and remember. And Eric Blair certainly was very much interested in that sort of side.
The truth is that kids aren't in any way poetic. They're merely savage little animals. Except that no animal is a quarter as selfish. A boy isn't interested in meadows, groves and so forth. He never looks at a landscape, doesn't give a damn for flowers. And, unless they affect him in some way, such as being good to eat, he doesn't know one plant from another. Killing things. That's about as near to poetry as a boy gets. And yet all the while there's that peculiar intensity, the power of longing for things as you can't long when you're grown up, and the feeling that time stretches out and out in front of you, and that whatever you're doing you could go on forever.
Eric Blair left Eton at 18. Within the year he'd enlisted with the Imperial Military Police in Burma. Meanwhile he'd fallen in love with his childhood friend Jacintha Buddicombe. Her rejection of him played its part in his determination to leave England.
Was he at all upset at your refusing to become engaged, or was it just something slightly playful? Or
I don't really know whether he was upset or not. He seemed, and partly from the letter that he wrote centuries later, when he wrote to me only a few months before he died, he seemed to remember all about it. And of course, going off to Burma by himself, he might have been more upset about it than ever would occur to me. You see, I never took him seriously, not from a romantic point of view.
It is a stifling, stultifying world in which to live. A world in which every word and every thought is censored. In England, it's hard even to imagine such an atmosphere. Everyone's free in England. But even friendship can hardly exist when every white man is a cog in the wheels of despotism. You're free to be a drunkard, an idler, a coward, a backbiter, a fornicator, but you are not free to think for yourself. Your opinion on every subject of any conceivable importance is dictated for you by the Pukka Sahib's code.
And then, of course, in Burma, he was very lonely. There was no one worthy of him to talk to. He was rather isolated among the whiskey-drinking, rather, usual Indian bosses. And he never made friends much in India. In Burma, rather, he was pretty lonely.
On the other hand, you see, Chris Hollis, who was at Eton with him and went and dined with him in Burma, in Rangoon, he found him extraordinarily sort of cheerful as a Bengal policeman. And when he talked about it, he spoke of it with great appreciation. And actually, because if you take Burmese days, the hero is the Sahib, isn't he? And I mean, the natives compare very poorly with this Sahib. So that, again, yes, he was anti-imperialist, but it was something that he appreciated, imperialism, and I think he thoroughly enjoyed himself in Burma, I might say.
It was about 40 yards to the gallows. I watched the bare brown back of the prisoner marching in front of me. He walked clumsily with his bound arms, but quite steadily with that bobbing gait of the Indian who never straightens his knees. At each step his muscles slid neatly into place. The lock of hair on his scalp danced up and down. His feet printed themselves on the wet gravel. And once, in spite of the men who gripped him by each shoulder, he stepped slightly aside to avoid a puddle on the path. It's curious, but till that moment I had never realized what it means to destroy a healthy, conscious man. When I saw the prisoner step aside to avoid the puddle, I saw the mystery, the unspeakable wrongness of cutting a life short when it is in full tide. This man was not dying, he was alive just as we were alive. All the organs of his body were working. He and we were a party of men walking together, seeing, hearing, feeling, understanding the same world. And in 2 minutes, with a sudden snap, one of us would be gone.
So when he came home on leave, he decided he just couldn't go back. His father was very disappointed and looked upon him as a sort of failure. And he felt that deeply. But his mother and I were very good friends, and she said to me, you know, Eric loves his father far more than he loves me. And I said, no, I don't think he does. It is that he wants his father to acknowledge him as a successful son. A son who couldn't make money, in old Mr. Blair's concept, was not the right sort of son.
By the time of his return from Burma in 1927, the Blair family had moved to Southwold in Suffolk. What brought them there?
Oh, I think a mixture of seeking for a genteel and a reasonably cheap retiring place. Southwold began to develop from a fishing village just before and then quite rapidly after the First World War as a very favoured retiring place of, shall we say, the lesser middling top ranks of the old Anglo-Indian civil servants. If you remember Orwell's remark that his parents were of the lower upper middle classes, which he precisely defined as the middle classes without money, this will be very much the kind of place they would come to, a kind of small-scale Bournemouth or Eastbourne.
Can I ask you both whether you remember George Orwell from your youth here in Southwold?
I remember him very well, but really sort of more to look at. And I mean, he used to be in places, but he was very shy, quiet, and, you know, did sort of become jolly with us all. I think he was thinking of thoughts.
He didn't join in parties, did he?
No.
He had individual friends.
Yes, he was like that.
He used to walk
A lot.
along the River Orwell, especially, which he loved. That's why he took the name Orwell.
And the marshes, he loved everything to do with that kind of thing. And he was always awfully nice, you know, very nice manners, and very quiet, gentle. But, of course, he never looked like an Eton scholar, did he?
No, he looked rather like a tramp always.
Yes.
But he was just that little bit above ordinary people, like
Yes.
myself.
And myself.
Was he striking looking?
Very tall and lanky. He had an awfully nice face, you know.
Did Blair get on with his parents? There must have been some tensions.
I should think there was quite a lot, but I think that, you know, he came back and...
Yes, they accepted it was always his home.
But of course he was very much a socialist.
And he gave up his job, which wasn't very well thought of in those days, you know. Once parents put one in something, one was expected to stay, but he
I think
came
they were
home.
disappointed. in him.
Disappointed more than anything.
That he came back from Burma?
Yes.
Yes.
In the spring of 1928, disenchanted with Southwold and disillusioned with English middle-class life, Eric Blair came to Paris to visit his aunt, Nellie Limousin. We know almost nothing of his life in Paris, except what he later chose to tell us about in his first published book. We do know, though, that he was now set on becoming a writer, that he gave English lessons, and that he found lodgings here at 6 Rue du Pot de Fer, once a working-class district in the 5th arrondissement. In the late autumn of 1929, he found himself short of money.
The Hotel X was a vast, grandiose place with a classical facade. I waited, and presently the chef du personnel, a sort of assistant manager, arrived and began to question me. He asked whether I was an experienced dishwasher, and I said that I was. He glanced at my hands and saw that I was lying, but on hearing that I was an Englishman, he changed his tone and engaged me. It was amusing to look around the filthy little scullery and think that only a double door was between us and the dining room. There sat the customers in all their splendour, spotless tablecloths, bowls of flowers, mirrors and gilt cornices and painted cherubim. And here, just a few feet away, us, in our disgusting filth. The waiter is proud, in a way, of his skill, but his skill is chiefly in being servile. His work gives him the mentality, not of a workman, but of a snob. He lives perpetually in the sight of rich people. He stands at their tables, listens to their conversations, sucks up to them with smiles and discreet little jokes. He has the pleasure of spending money by proxy. Moreover, there's always the chance that he may become rich himself. Between constantly seeing money and hoping to get it, the waiter comes to identify himself to some extent with his employers. He will take pains to serve a meal in style because he thinks he's participating in the meal itself. The moral is, never be sorry for a waiter. Sometimes when you sit in a restaurant still stuffing yourself half an hour after closing time, you feel that the tired waiter at your side must surely be despising you. But he is not. He's not thinking, as he looks at you, what an overfed lout. He's thinking, one day, when I've saved enough money, I shall be able to imitate that man. He's ministering to a kind of pleasure he thoroughly understands and admires, and that is why waiters are seldom socialists, have no effective trade union, and will work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're snobs, and they find the servile nature of their work rather congenial.
During his 2 years in Paris, Orwell's new companions introduced him to a level of life and of poverty that he had never known before. Here he associated with tramps and derelicts, the outcasts of society. On his return to England and Southwold, he was to continue his quest to know and understand such people better. In order to do this, he started to dress as they did. He called it tramping.
He began tramping in London down the Mile End Road in the footsteps, very literally, of Jack London, but he kept the habit up even when he took rests, I nearly said in his holidays, but of course he was just writing all the time then. He hadn't got a job, but from time to time he would totter back from London to have undisturbed quiet at home, writing, and 3 square meals a day cooked by his mum, that kind of thing. But he did go off tramping from here.
I want to set down some general remarks about tramps. When one comes to think of it, tramps are a queer product. Tens of thousands in number, marching up and down England like so many wandering Jews. In childhood, we'd been taught tramps are blackguards, and consequently, there exists in our minds a sort of ideal or typical tramp, a repulsive, dangerous creature who die rather than work and wants nothing but to beg, drink and rob henhouses. This tramp monster is no truer to life than the sinister Chinaman of the magazine stories. Why do tramps exist at all? It's a curious thing, but very few people know what makes a tramp take to the road. A tramp tramps not because he likes it, but for the same reason as a car keeps to the left. A destitute man, if he's not supported by the parish, can only get relief at the casual wards. Very little of the tramp monster will survive inquiry. A casual ward will often admit 100 tramps in one night, and these are handled by a staff of 3 porters. 100 ruffians could not be controlled by 3 unarmed men. It follows, then, that the serve them damn well right attitude that's normally taken towards tramps is no fairer than it would be towards cripples or invalids. When one has realised that, one begins to put oneself in a tramp's place and understand what his life is like.
What I feel the book represents is his enormous struggle to become a writer. After all, he told me that he wrote the whole of Down and Out 5 times, from beginning to end. The final version was the 5th version. It took him about 3 years of really quite agonizing effort. And in the end, I think he was just looking for material and exercising his wit. I think that his sense of the droll and his keen observer's eye, what I think Victor Pritchard called the dilatory eye, comes through in that book, and that makes it a work of literature. After all, that really is the essence of his sociological writings, that they are literary works.
I said to him, it's no use you're living down here if you want to be a writer. You must meet writers and intellectual people. So I said, if you want to come up to London for a weekend, we should be pleased to give you a shakedown. And he came, and after that he came frequently for a weekend until he got this job at the bookshop in Hampstead. They got a plaque on that shop. Have you seen it?
I have. At this moment, he hated all books, and novels most of all. Horrible to think of all that soggy, half-baked trash massed together in one place. 800 slabs of pudding walling him in, a vault of pudding stone. The thought was oppressive. He moved on through the open doorway into the front part of the shop. There was nobody outside. The front room, unlike the rest of the shop, was smart and expensive looking and contained about 2,000 books. Gordon averted his eyes from a beastly Rackham-esque dust jacket, elvish children tripping wendily through a bluebell glade. He looked out through the glass door. A foul day.
I was rather critical of the novel because I said it wasn't real, and I was told, well, novels are not supposed to be real. And it became very clear to me that, at that time at least, Orwell was thinking, as he had been talking, in stereotypes. There's no normal person came into the bookshop. There was no joy. The bookshop was rather, I don't know, slightly sordid, slightly depressing, none of which was true. The shop was in one of the nicest positions you could be in, within a couple of minutes of the Heath. It was, by those standards, a very good middle-class block. The people who came in were very mixed. There were intellectual refugees, there were local people, there were young people.
I used to haunt second-hand bookshops all my life, of course, and I knew West Stropes very well. I'd bought a lot of stuff from it. When I went in one day, I saw this tremendously tall man, you know, and I thought, oh, handy, he can reach all the books that we can't. And most booksellers in Hampstead in those days were very interested in what you bought. You know, they weren't indifferent like a lot of them are now. And so we started discussing books, and, you know, we said, have you read this, and do you like so-and-so, and that kind of thing. And I went in several times afterwards, and we went on discussing books, you know. And then he said, would I like to come and meet some of his friends who were also interested in books? So we began to meet quite regularly, you know, and went around together.
I remember him coming to a cocktail party. We had quite a lot of right-wing friends, rather nice, jolly girls with lots of money who were unpolitical. And then there were 1 or 2 left-wing political people and poets. It was the watershed between the unconscious political generation and the people who were beginning to get engaged in the 30s struggle. And he came along looking gaunt, shaggy, shabby, aloof. And he had this extraordinary magical effect on these women. They all wanted to meet him and started talking to him, and their sort of fur coats shook with pleasure. They were totally unprepared for anyone like that, and they responded to something.
Did you know Eileen at all?
I only met her twice at Rosalind's in Parliament Hill. That's where Eric met her, of course. She was a charming person, what I knew of her. We'd always agreed that if we met anybody else, we'd be open about it and just fade out, you see. And he told me that he was keen on Eileen, so I said, OK, that's it, cheerio sort of thing, you know.
Orwell had fallen in love with Eileen O'Shaughnessy, a student of psychology at London University. He hoped to get married, but he had no means of support. Then came an offer from the publisher Victor Gollancz, £500 to write a book about the depressed areas of the north.
The road from Mandalay to Wigan is a long one, and the reasons for taking it are not immediately clear. I went there partly because I wanted to see what mass unemployment is like at its worst, partly in order to see the most typical section of the English working class at close quarters. M sent me across to Wigan to see Joe Kennan, an electrician who takes a prominent part in the socialist movement. A very short, stout, powerful man with an extraordinary gentle, hospitable manner, and very anxious to help.
There was a knock at the door one Saturday afternoon. We were just having tea. And in this letter, Middleton Murray wanted me to find him lodgings of a worse type, practically of a slum character. So I asked Orwell in, he came in, and he had tea with us.
They found lodgings for me at Darlington Road, over a tripe shop where they take in lodgers. The husband, an ex-miner aged 58. The wife, ill with a weak heart, in bed on sofa in kitchen. House appreciably dirty and very smelly. A number of other lodgers.
The tenant of the shop was named Brooker. He was a fellow about 5'2" or 3 in height, very square built. He was an ex-miner, and of course in the Depression days, people resorted to all sorts of things to get a living. And he opened this corner shop at 35 Sovereign Road to eke out a living. And he sold everything from tripe to household commodities, a lot. It was a mixed lot. I took these photographs recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, because I knew the area was going to be demolished.
Mr. Brooker was a dark, small-boned, sour, Irish-looking man, astonishingly dirty. I don't think I ever once saw his hands clean. As Mrs. Brooker was now an invalid, he prepared most of the food, and like all people with permanently dirty hands, he had a peculiarly intimate, lingering manner of handling things. If he gave you a slice of bread and butter, there was always a black thumbprint on it. Even in the early mornings, when he descended into the mysterious den behind Mrs. Brooker's sofa and fished out the tripe, his hands were already black. I heard dreadful stories from the other lodgers about the place where the tripe was kept. Black beetles were said to swarm there. We lodgers were never given tripe to eat. At the time, I imagined that this was because tripe was too expensive. I've since thought that it was merely because we knew too much about it. The Brookers never ate tripe themselves, I noticed.
Well, I would say that Orwell's description of the shop was accurate. I don't think that was a correct image of Wigan, not by any means. Wigan people were rather proud, and they were clean. And those that could work worked hard. And being unemployed was a kind of stigma on the pride.
In Wigan, the competition among unemployed people for the waste coal becomes so fierce that it has led to an extraordinary custom called scrambling for the coal. An unemployed miner took me to see it one afternoon. We got to the place, a mountain range of ancient slag heaps with a railway running through the valley below. When the dirt comes up from the pit, it's loaded onto trucks and an engine runs these to the top of a slag heap. We walked up to the top. The men were shoveling the dirt out of the trucks, while down below their wives and children were kneeling, swiftly scrabbling with their hands in the damp dirt and picking out lumps of coal, the size of an egg or smaller. That scene stays in my mind as one of my pictures of Lancashire. The ragged men in their sacking aprons and their heavy black clogs kneeling in the cindery mud, and the bitter wind searching eagerly for tiny chips of coal. Did George Orwell send him a copy? Did he speak again after the book?
Well, from what I can gather, George Orwell promised to send him a copy, but he never sent him one. My dad had to buy his own.
Can you remember what he thought of it?
No, I don't think I can. I've heard him comment to different people, but I've never been interested myself in anything like that. I was a bit off.
This business of petty inconvenience and indignity, of being kept waiting about, of having to do everything at other people's convenience, is inherent in working class life. 1,000 influences constantly press a working man down into acted upon. He feels himself the slave of mysterious authority and has a firm conviction that they will never allow him to do this, that or the other.
When you come in here, you just feel like a scavenger, you know, because you've no job like that. Luke down at you, just thinking nothing.
And yet you've tried for jobs?
Yeah. Tried everywhere. Nothing.
The effect of unemployment upon everybody, married or single, and upon men more than upon women. The best intellects will not stand up against it. Take a miner, for instance, who's worked in the pit since childhood. How the devil is he to fill up the empty days? What were you doing before you became unemployed?
I worked at mines, down Salt Colliery, and in Beach Hill, that closed down. I went to Robin Hill, that closed down. Then I went to BDA, that closed down. I went to Cucumber Hall, they closed down. I went to Courtauld Scammers I got injured there, and then I went to Anzus after.
So you kept trying for jobs and the companies have kept folding?
I tried to keep going, but can't get nothing there, so I just don't bother.
The really important thing about the unemployed, the basic thing, if you look to the future, is the diet they're living on. It's worth considering how the money is spent. I asked an unemployed miner and his wife to make a list. Rent 9 shillings, clothing club 3 shillings, coal 2 shillings, gas 1 and 3, milk 10p halfpenny, union fee and so on.
I pay 24 out and not so much left. I pay my television. I put £2 a week away for my licence. I'm still owe £30 for it, yeah. Like, you know, I've £30 saved up for it.
Do you find it difficult to manage on the money they give you?
Well, I get £91 a fortnight for me, the wife and a child. It's just not enough at all.
Orwell, in his book, quotes a figure of 17 shillings unemployment benefit for a single man. Nowadays, that is £25. Now, that does sound a considerable increase. Obviously, the cost of living has changed dramatically since then, but in real terms, it still represents a substantial increase. As far as public assistance was concerned, a single man in 1936, according to Orwell, was entitled to 12 and sixpence. Nowadays, he would qualify for supplementary benefit at the rate of £25.70 plus his rent, if he had rent to pay. So again, a considerable increase in real terms in actual money. Not a fortune by any means, but an increase over Orwell's day.
But the terrible tragedy in the town, if you're making comparisons between now and Orwell's time, is the different positions. We have a situation that, to me, is quite horrific. That 75% of the kids of this town who left school last June have still got no permanent employment. I would expect that the parents of the kids would take a bigger say in the problems of the kids than they have done up to the present.
When I first left school, when I first, I finished my job, they used to say, why do you not get another job on all this? But no, they never said nothing. Just used to be me now to work,
When we first left school, they used to send you all the time, but now they just say, well, you can't, there's no work.
So they say don't even bother because they've realised what...
Oh, there's nothing in it. If you go down to our job centre already, them government schemes are not worth it, are they?
It's tragic to me that working class parents can see this happening to their own children, and they're not taking steps to do anything at all about it. We don't seem to have the anger now that we had in Orwell's times, and to me it's amazing.
Your father was very active in Labour politics.
Oh, well, he was interested in conditions and people and things like that. Probably those days they had to be, but I've never bothered.
Do you think people are less interested in union activities now?
Certain, yeah. They don't bother the same these days.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know. I just work with people, and when I talk about people in my own sphere, you know, they don't seem as interested as they used to do.
On the day when there was a full chamber pot under the breakfast table, I decided to leave. The place was beginning to depress me. It was not only the dirt, the smells and the vile food, but the feeling of stagnant, meaningless decay, of having got down into some subterranean place where people go creeping round and round just like black beetles in an endless muddle of sloven jobs and mean grievances. The most dreadful thing about people like the Brookers is the way they say the same things over and over again. The train bore me away through the monstrous scenery of slag heaps, chimneys, piled scrap iron, foul canals, paths of cindery mud, crisscrossed by the prints of clogs. As we moved slowly through the outskirts of the town, we passed little grey slum houses running at right angles to the embankment. Quite soon the train drew away into open country, and that seemed strange, almost unnatural, as though the open country had been a kind of park. The whole of the industrial districts are really one enormous town, fortunately of a much larger area. So even in the middle of them, there's still one for cleanness and decency. For quite a long time, the train was rolling through open country before the villa civilization began to close in on us again. And the slag heaps, This house is bigger than I'd imagined. 2 rooms, a tiny larder under the stairs downstairs, 3 or 4 rooms upstairs. The front room, which should be parlour, is used as bedroom. Living room, about 14 foot 12, has the usual kitchen of zinc and copper. No gas stove. The house is very clean and decent, and my room the best I've had in lodgings up here. Flannelette sheets. Mr. G, short, powerful man, aged about 45, with coarse features, enlarged nose, and a very fatigued, pale look. He's rather bald, has his own teeth, usual in a working-class person of that age, but they're very discoloured. A bit deaf, but very ready to talk, especially about technicalities of mining. Mrs. G is about 10 years younger, motherly type, always cooking and cleaning, accent broader than her husband's. 2 little girls, Doreen and Irene, 11 and 10. Rather a strange experience to read this description of your family when you were about 10. Some people have said that Orwell, in describing working people, patronised them or got them wrong. Did you feel that when you read the description?
No, not really, no, because the description what he's given me in there of my father, that was my father, in every way at all, feature-wise, everything. I mean, that was my father, and it was him, just as he described him. But he doesn't give much description, you know, of anybody else really. But I suppose, but as I say, I mean, in the part of the book, it said my father was a stubby little fellow. Well, he was. And he was bald. I never knew my father with any hair. Just a sort of a round ring, you know, and bald. And that's what he says in the book. And that, when you read, if you knew my father and read that, you'd know that was my dad.
Mr. G has worked in the pit ever since a small boy. On one occasion, he was buried by a fall of earth or stone. No bones broken. 2 hours to drag him to the cage. Works at removing the coal onto the trucks after it's cut. Scuffing, I think it's called. He and his mate are paid piecework from 2 and 2pence a ton, £1 each. Wages average £2.10 a week. His stoppages amount to 6 and 11. He works at Darton, about 4 miles away, and goes there by bus. Journeys cost 6pence a day, so his net wages are about £2 a week. I note that G does not eat very much. At present, working on the afternoon shift, he has the same breakfast as I have and has a light lunch, such as bread and cheese, about 12:30. He says he cannot do his work if he's eaten too much.
He says in the book that your father wasn't a very well man. He described him as being quite ill-looking.
He looked really sallow. He had not much colour, you know, but his health was all right. I mean, he worked in the pit and he was 71 when he died, and he was still, his cards were still in the pit.
I have arranged to go down the Grimethorpe pit next Saturday. This is a very possesses certain machinery that doesn't exist anywhere else in England. The man I spoke to told me it was a mile to the coalface, a fabric match the whole way.
Well, this is Grimethorpe Colliery, which is approximately 600 yards deep. This is the pit that Orwell visited and went down to the coalface. The conditions prevailing at that time will be much more different than those prevailing today. Obviously, there's been a campaign to make pits more efficient and better, and of course this has taken place.
You get into the cage, which is a steel box about as wide as a telephone box and 2 or 3 times as long. It holds 10 men, but they're packed like pilchards in a tin, and a tall man cannot stand upright in it. The steel door shuts upon you, and somebody working the winding gear above drops you into the void. You have the usual momentary qualm in your belly and a bursting sensation in the ears. What is surprising is the immense horizontal distances that have to be travelled underground. Before I'd been down a mine, I'd vaguely imagined the miner stepping out of the cage and getting to work on a ledge of coal a few yards away. I'd not realised that before he even gets to his work, he may have to creep through passages as long as from London Bridge to Oxford Circus.
We rigged him out in helmets and a lamp, and travelling down the main road, which, of course, I could comfortably stand up in, but the weight of the roof had bent a number of girders, and we hadn't gone more than 300 yards when Orwell just didn't duck his head quick enough. Hit him, knocked the helmet off, knocked him down. He was flat out. When we revived him and got him round, and we travelled further in, and the further in we travelled, the lower the roof, and I would think he'd to travel best part of 3/4 of a mile. It bent absolutely double. I had to be bent.
At the start, to walk stooping is rather a joke, but it is a joke that soon wears off. You begin to wonder if you will ever get to the end. After half a mile, it becomes, I'm not exaggerating, an unbearable agony. It may seem I'm exaggerating, but what I want to emphasise is this. This frightful business of crawling to and fro is not even part of the miner's work. An extra, like the city man's daily ride on the tube.
The working face was, I think, 26 inches. And by the time we landed there, Orwell was unquestionably, he was exhausted. And I remember him lying down on the coal, on the floor, and I said to him, it's a so-and-so good job. They don't know what you're down here for, to write a book about mining. That should be a fall of roof and bury you.
Watching coal miners at work, you realise momentarily what different universes people inhabit. Down there where coal is dug, it's a sort of world apart, which one can quite easily live life without hearing of. More than anyone else, perhaps, the miner can stand as a type of manual worker. Not only because his work is awful, but also because it's so vitally necessary. and yet so remote from our experience. In a way, it's infuriating you're no doubt about your own status as an intellectual, for it is brought home to you, at least while you're watching, that it is only because miners sweat their guts out that superior persons can remain superior. The conditions for your father down the pit were...
Oh, yeah, they're a lot different down the pit when my father was down from what they are today. That, to my way of thinking, was really work. You know, don't get me wrong, the miners still work, but it wasn't as easy going. They hadn't all this machinery, we'll put it that way, to do these jobs. But
did he complain about it? Did he seem...
Very, very little complained, very little complained. Used to come home on a whatever shift and get bathed. And if they could afford, they used to go out for an hour, but as I say, money wasn't as easy. When you've children in them days, you just didn't go out like you do today.
The house has changed quite a lot, I bet, since George Orwell stayed here.
Yes, it has, yes. Because you see the mod cons now, everything's got into it now, so we bought the house after...
He says then it was an outside lavatory, various other things, but he's quite nice about the house.
Yes, the toilet is still there outside, but not in use. Nobody uses it now, we have them upstairs, most of us. I mean, I've lived here all my life. I'll probably finish up here, I suppose. I've been all right. I mean, it's handy for everything. It's quite a nice place, I like it. I suppose it's what you get used to, isn't it, really, in time. I've known nothing else, so probably wouldn't settle anywhere else if I went anywhere else.
In a working-class home, I'm not thinking at the moment of the unemployed, you breathe a warm, decent, human atmosphere, which it is not so easy to find elsewhere. I've often been struck by the peculiar, easy completeness, the perfect symmetry, as it were, of a working-class interior at its best. It is not the triumphs of modern engineering, the crowds at Ascot and the Eton and Harrow match, but the memory of working-class interiors that reminds me our age has not been an altogether bad one in which to live. What did you think of Road to Wigan Pier?
Oh, I thought it was really a terrible book. I thought it denigrated all socialists and and it put the working class in a terribly sordid light. I mean, he admired the miners for their physical prowess, but not for any sort of political commitment they had. And I mean, the miners were very political in those days, very more or less the vanguard of the trade union movement, and he seems to have ignored anything that was going on the positive side of politics and just concentrated on all the sordid aspects.
His way of portraying the people of Wigan was to portray the worst side of Wigan. Portray the worst side of them. Not portray what the trade union movement at that time was doing, not what Jerry Kennan was doing on the people that showed him around the town. Not the programme, they didn't portray what they were trying to bring to the people of this town. All he did was try to put the people down.
Is it ever possible to be really intimate with the working class? I shall have to discuss that later. I will only say here that I do not think it is possible. But undoubtedly it is easier in the north than it would be in the south to meet working class people on approximately equal terms. The essential point is your middle-class ideals and prejudices are tested by contact with others, which are not necessarily better, but are certainly different. Unfortunately, you do not solve the class problem by making friends with tramps. At most, you get rid of some of your own class prejudice by doing so. When you come to the normal working class, the position is totally different. To begin with, there is no short cut into their midst. You can become a tramp simply by putting on the right clothes and going to the nearest casual ward, but you can't become a navvy or a coal miner. You couldn't get a job as a navvy or a coal miner even if you were equal to the work. Via socialist politics you can get in touch with the working class intelligentsia, but they are hardly more typical than tramps or burglars. Whichever way you turn, this curve the class difference confronts you like a wall of stone. Or rather, it is not so much like a stone wall as a plate glass pane of an aquarium. It's so easy to pretend that it isn't there, and so impossible to get through. Unfortunately, it is nowadays the fashion to pretend that the glass is penetrable.
There was such an extraordinary change in his, both in his writing and in a way also in his attitude after he'd been to the North and written that book. I mean, it's almost as if there'd been a kind of fire smouldering in him all his life, which suddenly sort of broke into flame.
What about the earlier work, the Etonian discovers the working classes? Do you think that did modify middle class attitude?
Well looked on in Wigan, I don't think.
He didn't understand the working class. He understand it from bringing up where he never wanted anything in his life, except when he set out to get material for that book. He left Eton, and I thought it was reading like the Eton people do. He had a completely different background.
I think he saw it as an outsider, you see, but as an outsider who was really in it, as